economies and these economies of scale determine the shape of a firm's long-run average cost curve. What is required? Before the diagram, you cannot straight away abruptly draw the diagram. You need an introduction. Alright, then. So, basically, in order to attempt this question, what you should do is, you explain what is long-run average cost curve first. You have to give the definition of LRAC. Once you have given the definition of LRAC, then you give the definition of economies of scale and diseconomies of scale. If you are, what normally would student do, right, or what I can expect student to do, when they explain LRAC, they will immediately draw this diagram to support. LRAC is the envelope curve of SRAC. But if I were you, I will not draw two diagrams because I can incorporate the LRAC into three parts, right or not? So this part would be EOS, CEOS, and DEOS. You see that? So you draw two diagrams in one. So for example, this is how my diagram would look like. You see that or not? So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to explain LRAC. If you want, you can draw this diagram just to show LRAC is the envelope curve of SRAC. And then you explain economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, and then you draw the other diagram, which is basically the saucepan shape diagram, which we have EOS, CEOS, and DEOS. Isn't it? So this diagram you have to draw it complete like how I have drawn in class and explain in detail each and every phase. Understand, people? And its implication. So in explaining this, if you look at my explanation, it's not complete because it just explains what happened in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I have not put in, right, what causes the change in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So when I ask you what causes the change in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, it is the sources of economies of scale, the internal and external sources of economies of scale. So in your answer, you have to incorporate the internal sources of economies, internal and external sources of economies of scale and diseconomies of scale. You don't have to explain them elaboratedly, but you have to mention it is because of these factors that when the firm increases the output level, the cost of production falls. It is because of this factor, as the firm increases its output level, the cost increases. You understand? So each of the phase has to be clearly explained. Clear, people? Briefly explain the features of perfect competition and monopoly market structure. So what is the question 1 here? What do they want in perfect competition and the monopoly market structure?
Their features.
It's not definition. Isabella, what did you say? Advantages and disadvantages. Someone said something there? It is characteristic. The word features means characteristic. If you give definition, you probably get 1 or 2 marks. If you give advantages, you will get 0 mark because you did not answer the question. You see that or not, right? So normally the mistake what students do is they give in point form. Point 1, that's it. No explanation. But for features, if you give many bias, for example, you have to explain what is this money bias means. You see that or not? So each point has to be explained. So in this type of question, do you need to give example? No need. You are not required to give example. The question just want features. You give the features. This is not an application question. You see that they're not. So you just give the features, and the features should be well explained. You see that they're not. So this is to test on your understanding of the theory. Okay? So here the question say perfect competition and monopoly structure. In exam it can be oligopoly and monopolistic or whatever. You see that they're not, right? A different combination. Okay, next question. Explain, this is where you got to think a little bit. Explain whether market intervention is required in the hospitality and tourism industry. First of all, did you understand the question now? Okay. What is the question 1? Explain whether market intervention is required in the hospitality and tourism industry. What do you think?
Is related to globalization where they instill policies and stuff like that, that type of intervention?
No, here explain whether market intervention is required. When we're looking at market intervention, what is market intervention there? What is meant by market intervention? It's nothing to do with globalization, it is just market intervention. Who may intervene in the market? Government, right? So when we say market intervention is basically government intervene to set what? Prices and policies, isn't it? The government intervene. So this is what, if you remember in my first lecture, under the economic system, I mentioned invisible hand. You remember the invisible hand? So this is where the government intervene. So now the question here is, explain whether market intervention is required in hospitality and tourism industry. What do you think? In your opinion, do you think market intervention is required?
Yes.
Okay, if so, why? If you just say yes, you might only get half a mark, right or not? So yes, it is required because
So that you protect the local industries and prevent international
yeah, in one way, yes, the government can intervene to protect the local tourism industries or tourism businesses. So from multinational companies monopolizing the business to prevent monopolization, right or not? So that is one reason, definitely. Other than that,
Maybe I don't know how to put it into words, but we can talk about standards in the industry whereby there's like a minimum level they need to adhere to in terms of how they price their goods.
to set prices, right? To set prices so that it is not, goods are not overpriced, or rather tourism products are not, to ensure that tourism products and services are not overpriced, right? Because if you overprice, it might also discourage tourists from traveling, all right? Other than that, when would government intervene? When the government would want to provide public goods, right or not? In order for tourism industry to boom, it is just not necessary for you to have hotels, restaurants, and theme park. Is that enough? That's definitely not enough, right? You want to still preserve and refurbish your historical sites, right or not? Museums and all this. And who's going to provide all this? It's government, all right? Moreover, when it comes to interconnectivity, right? Transportation, telecommunication, and all these are also provided by the government. You see that or not? So the government will intervene when it comes to providing public goods in order to enhance the tourism development. Okay. Other than that, I quickly go through it. I got really no time to sing. So basically here, economists widely recognize the government intervention should not occur unless you have to understand that government intervention should not simply occur in a democratic country or rather in a laissez-faire economy. Unless if it is a communist country practicing a command system, then the government has full control on how it wants to allocate its resources. You see that enough? But if we are practicing mixed economy and laissez-faire economy, government simply should not intervene, right? So the government can intervene under a valid ground, as you say, to control the price. For example, free market is most efficient means of allocating the resources. So when the market fails in terms of allocating the resources efficiently, so meaning to say, private sectors are benefiting, the business class is benefiting, but the working class is suffering out of the price set by the business class. You see that? So in this case, in order for equal distribution of wealth, in order for equal distribution of resources, the government can intervene. You understand? Other than that, the market is imperfect, it's the same. So when the market fails to achieve social efficiency, when there are externalities, and if you see, in order to protect merit from the demerit goods, protected embargoed goods, supply of public goods, and realities of economic growth. So what is meant by realities of economic growth? When would government intervene? When the economy is at the peak or when the economy is actually not performing well? When the economy is not performing well. You see that enough? So these are some of the reasons or rather when should the government intervene. You understand? So which basically you can have different ideas, you can have different points. You understand? How you elaborate the point, how you are able to answer the question in a more matured manner will make you, this is what will create the difference between an A student and a C student. You see that now? You all can have the same point, but how you explain the point in a more matured way, you see that? That's what will make the difference between an A student and a C student. Understand? Okay, next is discuss how international trade benefit tourism and hospitality industry. So how would you start this question? By defining what is international trade. So once you have already defined what is international trade, then you move on to the benefits, right? So let's say point 1, international trade creates employment. Okay, let's say this is our first point, employment. So explain with example. Okay, explain with example. So if it is a 10-mark question, I would easily expect 5 points with examples for each point. You understand? So this is basically how I would expect you to answer if there is anything like this. Next question. Explain the economic policy option available to government whose country is suffering from high level of employment. How would you answer this question? Have you done this question before? Yes, right. Some of you have answered and submitted to be marked. We did this question in class. I did ask you to do, but only very few submitted. It's a similar type of answer. You see that enough? How would you start this question? How would you start this question?
By defining
Obviously, you will start explaining by defining the macroeconomic policies, right? So generally, what is macroeconomic policy? And for this situation, what policy would you choose? Expansionary policy, right enough. So under expansionary policy, you have two. What are those? Expansionary monetary policy and expansionary fiscal policy. So you will slowly explain, you will start with explaining macroeconomic policy, and you will explain macroeconomic policy is divided into contractionary and expansionary policy. And for this situation, the government will implement expansionary policy. And then you move on to explain expansionary fiscal policy. What is it, right? And then expansionary monetary policy. What is it? How does it work? And then you can draw the Keynesian diagram. Alright, the Keynesian expansion model diagram, and then explain the diagram and conclude it. You understand? Okay, this is what would be expected from you for this question. Okay, lastly, outline 3 possible effects might this option have on the business in country related to this. Obviously, you will start explaining by defining the macroeconomic policies, right? So generally, what is macroeconomic policy? And for this situation, what policy would you choose? Expansionary policy, right enough. So under expansionary policy, you have two. What are those? Expansionary monetary policy and expansionary fiscal policy. So you will slowly explain, you will start with explaining macroeconomic policy, and you will explain macroeconomic policy is divided into contractionary and expansionary policy. And for this situation, the government will implement expansionary policy. And then you move on to explain expansionary fiscal policy. What is it, right? And then expansionary monetary policy. What is it? How does it work? And then you can draw the Keynesian diagram. Alright, the Keynesian expansion model diagram, and then explain the diagram and conclude it. You understand? Okay, this is what would be expected from you for this question. Okay, lastly, outline 3 possible effects might this option have on the business in country related to this. What do you think? Outline 3 possible effects, or any kind of more possible effects might this option have on the business in the country. What is the option? Expansionary policy, right enough. So what is the effect of expansionary policy on the businesses in your country? So what is it? Increase in the money supply? Increase in the money supply in the economy, yes. But how would that have an implication on the businesses? Lower interest rate, right? That's very good. The government will obviously, when we're talking about expansionary monetary policy, the government will lower the interest rate, and this will benefit the government. Okay? This will benefit the business. So when the business enjoys lower interest rate, what is the implication? You have to explain the implication. That will be one point. You understand? So what is the next point? Expansionary expansionary policies does not necessarily create full employment. Does it create full employment? It does not. We just want to know when the government implements monetary policy, expansionary monetary or fiscal policy, what is the implication on the businesses? So you saw from the monetary aspect. So see it from the fiscal aspect. What would the government do? Yeah, what would they do with the taxes? Decrease tax. Alright? So that would be another implication or effect on the business, right or not? The businesses enjoy lower taxation rate now, isn't it? Okay, what else? Fact, see from. So if you're looking at government, this is, if you're looking at business, this is up, right or not? What would the effect be during expansionary policy in terms of consumption? So when consumption increase, will that have an impact on the business?
Yes.
What will happen in terms of investment? Increase. One, because of the interest rate, right or not? So that is business expansion, right? That's how you relate it. Government, we leave it. How about export and import? During expansionary policy, will this encourage export or encourage import? Export. So when export increases, will this benefit the businesses as well? Obviously. You see that or not, right? So when you want to look at the effect, all you have to do is look at the macroeconomic variables. You understand? And its implication on the businesses. Then explain in detail. Okay guys? Next. Okay, this is very basic. Define the law of demand and the law of supply. Can you define the law of demand and law of supply? Okay. Using appropriate diagram, explain how the demand and supply curve illustrate the related law. So what do you have to do? How would you answer this question? Straight away define law of demand, law of supply, or you would define demand, supply, then you will draw the diagram, and then you will explain the diagram using the law of supply. How would you answer this question?
Second way.
What did I say in the second one?
You define demand and supply, draw the diagram, and you explain the diagram using the law of demand and law of supply.
You understand? Okay? So it's pretty simple here. As I said, this is the basic question, right? Demand and supply. Next one. Discuss the process of market adjustment when the price of elephant wine decreases from its initial equilibrium price level. Use a relevant diagram to support your discussion. So again here, what the question wants. This is market analysis, right or not? So market analysis, looking at the new market equilibrium price and quantity. So in this case, what would you do? How would you start your answer? Do not relate question 12 to question 13. Let's say you're answering question 13 on its own. How would you answer this question? You explain the equilibrium. Very good. Obviously, you will explain demand, supply, and how you arrive at the equilibrium and what is equilibrium, right or not? And once you explain equilibrium, would you explain the surplus and the shortages? Would you explain the surplus and shortages as well? Yes. Demand, supply, this is your P0, this is your P1, this is your P2. P2, here we have surplus of supply, right? And here we have shortages. Remember this diagram? So you have to explain the whole thing. Once you have already explained the whole thing, have you answered the question? Not yet. Because the question clearly says here, when the price of elephant brine decreases from its initial equilibrium price level, right? Use a relevant diagram to support your discussion. So now you know your current equilibrium is P0 and Q0. Now when the price of elephant brine reduces, it will affect the demand or will it affect the supply? It will affect the supply and demand. So how will it affect the demand and supply? What will happen to your supply?
Decreases.
The supplier will decrease. How about demand? Demand increases. So when supply decreases, demand increases. Now in your diagram, you have to show the consequent changes. You understand? Huh? You have to show the consequent changes. So let's say demand increase more than supply, then you will see the impact on the diagram. So draw the respective diagram and explain the diagram with a new equilibrium price and quantity demanded. Following? Following? How you should start this question? The first question basically asks, what do you understand by the term multiplier? Alright? Here is pretty straightforward. So what do you understand by the term multiplier? You give the definition of multiplier. Just by giving the definition of multiplier is not enough. You have to move on with the process, multiplier process diagram, and explain the process. In the due course of you explaining the multiplier process, you will explain the direct effect, indirect effect, and the induced effect. So these three effects will have to be explained as you explain the multiplier process, because the multiplier process shows the direct effect, the indirect effect, and the induced effect. You see that? So once you have defined, draw the diagram, explain the diagram, and incorporate your effect, the multiplier effects, into the explanation when you explain the multiplier process. That is the first part. The second part, what does it determine? It basically determines, what does it determine? It determines for every dollar spent by a tourist, how much outputs or sales generated in the economy, right or not? Secondly, what does it determine? For every dollar or every $100 spent by a tourist, how many additional jobs created in the local economy? And thirdly, for every dollar spent by a tourist, how much income is generated in the economy? This is what it determines. For every dollar or for every $100 spent by a tourist, what is the additional thing in terms of income, output, and employment is generated in the economy? That is basically what does it determine. Why does it matter? And to whom does it matter? Does it really matter to us? Multiplier doesn't matter to us. To whom does it matter? To the government, right or not? So why does it matter to the government? Why do we study? Why do we do the impact analysis? That was my first lecture in the class. Why do we study? Why do we do an impact analysis? It is important to the government for policy making. Remember or not? Multiplier tells you the exact contribution, tells the government the exact sectorial contribution, right or not? So based on the sectorial contribution, it allows the government to develop the right policies and strategies to further enhance the particular sector if that sector is a significant sector for their economy. You understand? So it is generally for policy making. Clear? So this is how your question, your answer should be, and you have to elaborate on this. You see that or not, right? So if we look at second question is rather straightforward. Discuss the sources of leakage and how leakage inhibits the growth and the contribution of tourism sector to national economy. If you look back at my notes, do you see many sources of leakage? Yes, right? So each source of leakages you have to explain. Okay, explain. When you say repatriation of profit, so don't just leave it with repatriation of profit. I may not understand what does that mean, right? So you have to clearly explain what is meant by repatriation of profit. Let's say purchase of capital equipment, and then you explain what is this purchase of capital equipment and why is it important or why is it necessary in the tourism sector. Once you have already explained all, and then in your conclusion, which is very important, right, you have to link it. How does leakage inhibits the growth? So it is in the conclusion you will be telling all the above leakages inhibits the growth, isn't it? So why and how it inhibits the growth will have to be discussed in your conclusion, which is your last paragraph. Understand? Normally what happens is, right, what will student do? They will write, discuss the sources of leakage. They write 5, 6 sources of leakage, memorize and write. But finally, they don't link it how it inhibits the growth. When you don't link it in your last paragraph that how all these leakages, sources of leakages that you have explained inhibits growth, have you answered the question? You have not answered the question. So you probably will get a sympathy mark of 2 to 3 marks only, despite you writing everything else. Because to me, you have not answered the question. You understand? So you're going to be very careful. Do not write what you know, because I don't want to know what you know. You make sure you answer the question. You understand? Relate to it. You understand? And remember, you don't have your internet with you, you can't use any of this gadget, so you cannot give country-based example. You see that or not, right? Unless you have it from your assignment, you have it here, you give it. Otherwise, don't simply give wrong facts and figures. Clear, people?
Yes.
Okay? Any questions so far? No question.